during the course of the last couple of weeks, I've come across a book, the title of which alone recommends it. This is called Presidential Puppetry. Presidential Puppetry by Andrew Craig. And it's a new book, and here's the importance of it from my point of view. The biggest fallacy, or one of the biggest and most stubborn fallacies in analyzing U.S. politics is this assumption that presidents automatically have power, and that if something happens, the president must have made it happen. People say, well, if the battleship Maine blew up in Havana Harbor, then that must have been designed by William McKinley. And if the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, that must have been designed by Franklin D. Roosevelt. Both of those are wrong, by the way. Neither one was designed by a U.S. president. And 9/11, people say, oh, well, Bush or maybe Cheney must have designed every detail of that and run every detail. No. The whole point is that the U.S. presidency is a puppet post unless you have a president who is willing to fight to make it something else. And Franklin D. Roosevelt is the leading example of recent years, and John F. Kennedy is also one. So here we have this very interesting book by Andrew Craig, which describes, and this is Craig, K-R-E-I-G, Presidential Puppetry, Obama, Romney, and Their Masters. It's available from, from Eagle View Books in Washington, D.C. Andrew, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, but welcome. Why don't you come on? Are you there? Hello? Andrew? Hello? Maybe the control room can help me out here? No? Okay. Well, let me just, go ahead. And let me just describe what I found one of the more interesting samples of this stuff. Obama and Romney and so forth, all right, fine. But here, let's look at the part about General David Petraeus, right, in whom we're always interested because he incarnates the tendencies towards dictatorship, coup d'etat in the present situation. And here's what we find, and this was something I thought was valuable. In the fall of 2009, New York Congressman Eric Massa was approached by 4 U.S. generals, and they informed him that General David Petraeus, while serving as an active duty officer, Petraeus had met twice with former GOP Vice President Dick Cheney, and Cheney had suggested to Petraeus that Petraeus compete in a weak field for the 2012 GOP nomination to oppose Obama's re-election. And this was considered illegal and quite possibly treasonous for a commander in wartime, because a battlefield commander has a sensitive role. And Massa had worked for Wesley Clark, and he claims that Wesley Clark never did any of this. And then we have Massa then taken down by scandals, Watergated out. And maybe, Andrew, if you're with us now?
Yes, can you hear me?
Hi there. Look, I'm just going through what I thought was one of the gems in your book, which is the description of how Eric Massa lost his seat in Congress practically because he went forward exposing General David Petraeus. So maybe you take it from there.
Well, I will. It's kind of an amazing story because pretty much everybody in public life remembers Massa's takedown and vaguely thinks that there was some big scandal, but when you look at it, it really wasn't hardly anything in terms of scandal, and Massa disputes even what was there. And when one realizes with all of this surveillance, including over members of the Senate and Congress, and former NSA analyst Russell Tice has said that they even had surveillance on Obama when he was a senator, it shows not just surveillance but reprisal and a level of control by not simply the intelligence services, but intelligence services that seem to be loyal to these elites, these outside of almost the scope of government. So I did hear your very kind introduction, Webster. Sorry, there was some glitch preventing me from talking, but I'll say that it's really terrific to be on the program because the book draws heavily from a number of your important works, and I'm glad you found something that was somewhat novel because, researchers, including myself, are deeply indebted to your cutting-edge research on a number of these topics.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Now, let's dig a little bit deeper now. I found the Petraeus one extremely intriguing. Maybe we get you to give us maybe another specific case that you've come up with, something really scandalous.
Oh,
then, let's go on then to your general findings about this question of puppetry, and above all, who the puppet masters actually are.
Well, exactly. First of all, even though these are pretty current examples, including the one I'm just about to lay on you, it goes back 100 years to kind of set the stage with the Rhodes money, creating the Council on Foreign Relations and the Rhodes Scholarships, and leading up to all of this, including secret societies. But just as a footnote on this Petraeus scandal, before I get to the next one, we have a very interesting situation where Petraeus, after being fired in disgrace, big sex scandal, he pops up at the Bilderberg Group meeting in June, and he's CEO of a hedge fund arranged by puppet masters from KKR. They've named him as one of their CEOs on Wall Street, so he gets to go to the Bilderberg meeting with David Rockefeller himself, who's still alive at age 98, and other people like Kissinger and
Henry Kravis, right? Henry Kravis is now his money bags.
Yes, exactly. And of course, Henry Kravitz's father helped create the oil depletion allowance. You know, he was a tax genius from Oklahoma.
And Kravis was, of course, a close friend of Prescott Bush and one of the sponsors of George Bush the Elder.
Yes, they go all the way back. This is dynastic power. But you ask for a fresh scandal. Here's one you probably know, but very few other people know. There was a very interesting article in the Washington Post about a month ago, and it was only 2 inches long, but it had the interesting announcement that a little company called Amazon.com had won the contract to handle the next generation cloud computing for a federal agency that goes by the name CIA. And what this means is that yet another Bilderberg Group attendee, the new owner of the Washington Post, Jeffrey Bezos, his company...
I think it's actually pronounced Bozos, as in Bozo.
Okay.
But the music is on top of us. We have one more segment of 10 minutes, and we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is the second hour of our Christmas week broadcast. And I'm here from Washington, D.C. We're talking also in Washington, D.C. Andrew Craig, that's Kreig. The book is called Presidential Puppetry, Obama, Romney, and Their Masters. And Andrew was just telling us about Jeff Bezos and Amazon.com. Not content with taking over the Washington Post, they're also taking over cloud computing for the CIA.
Yes, and they had a 2-inch story about it, exploring the ramifications, I'm sure. But it just covers their butt, so to speak. They can say, oh, we covered that. But think of the implications of a company that's got this vast consumer database of everything that we buy. It's a fine company. I mean, they do excellent consumer service and so forth. But think of what it means if they also control still the most influential news organization in Washington, and the CIA's they're seeking CIA business, and in fact have obtained it. And they would probably say, well, they're all in separate little categories, and there's no problem for the public. I don't believe that there's no potential problem, and actual problems. I can easily visualize that. It's all fairly new, but that's the kind of thing that the book explores, and the public really needs to be concerned about. Here's another one, and I'll be very brief, but just to toss something else out. I explore in the book election machines and how they are capable of being manipulated to adjust election results, and in fact have been. And I get into not only who's doing it and how, but here's a couple of other implications. Somebody owns these private companies, and I trace it back to there's Bush family investment in this, and they don't need to affect every machine. In fact, the problems tend to arise when the votes are accumulated, and so it's done in a way that the nice older volunteers at the polls are never going to know about. And so elections look like they're just normally and honestly run, but there's a huge potential for manipulating the results, as in 2004, and I document that there was an attempt made in Ohio last year, and the news media just does not want to get into this for various reasons that I could explore, but part of it has to do with they're making a lot of money on election ads, and if the public started thinking that all of this years of campaigning, all of these punditry and all of that stuff can be manipulated in some districts in Ohio, people would be very upset. So, and then finally, we're exporting this technology to third world countries or overseas countries, and some of them do not necessarily want advanced voting machine software, particularly controlled by backers of the Bush family, let's say,
sure,
determining their elections. And we make it look like these ungrateful countries, some of whom are in Eastern Europe or elsewhere, just don't like democracy because they don't like these NGOs and others who are touting this kind of election software, but maybe they know something that the American public should know.
I think they do. For Ohio, we had Bob Fitrakis come on here. He was one of the guys leading that attempt to expose that in Ohio. And now, Andrew, now that you've got your book out and you're going to sell a lot of copies, you're going to see what a ripoff that Bezos is, because you're going to see that Amazon fixes the transactions so that they rake off most of the profit, leaving very little for us poor authors, of which number you are now one. But now, the big question, some idea of the puppet masters, how you see them, maybe the control mechanisms, and even some idea of how to put an end to this system.
Well, that's a very important part, because first comes knowledge of what the ordinary person in this country and elsewhere is up against. And we can't just relax and leave things to government and think that a vote every 4 years is going to solve the problems, because all of these people are responsive to the puppet masters much more so than us. So we've got to know the secrets. But we also have to take some action. You've got an important program to organize around the notions of austerity, the needless austerity that the puppet masters are imposing. But there are additional things that people can and must do, really, to protect our futures, each one of us. And my suggestion, after being here in Washington as an attorney and advocate for a couple decades now, is that individuals do not matter to certainly puppet masters, but even to their minions in government. They're going to pretend that they care about individuals and individual complaints, but it's really almost a waste of time. The main solution I see is to pick organizations and leaders that you care about, get active in organizations, and adjust their agendas for these kind of reform topics. And organizations can be civic, community based in a region, or professional, or school alumni groups, but get them focused on serious issues and volunteer to create events and be involved in publicity, because ultimately it's organizations, either new or existing ones, that are going to have the clout to achieve the reform goals that are quite serious and necessary right now.
Okay, and you're actually doing some of these things. The Justice Integrity Project, which is online, Justice Integrity Project, and the McClendon Group, right? Which is
which is a speaker society based at the National Press Club that brings in eminent alternative speakers, including yourself recently, but Ralph Nader, Helen Thomas, often people who, dare I say it, have fallen out of favor with the kind of corporate media and are basically the corporate media gets squeamish about inviting those truth tellers who might antagonize the minions of the puppet masters.
And we just had Mother Agnes Mariam of Syria, right, in the face of a new attempt to start a war in Syria. This was extremely timely, and that was part of, you were certainly an important part of that.
That's exactly what the kind of thing we're talking about, just briefly. So someone invites Mother Agnes, she gives a talk, and then we're able to write about it and get this important alternative view out in a way that the corporate media, which is just banging the drum for more and more war and suffering over there, it makes it a little easier for them to cover it, although most of them still won't.
Correct. So the book is Presidential Puppetry, Obama, Romney, and Their Masters, Andrew Craig, Kreig. Andrew, do they have to go to Amazon, or can they get it direct from a publisher, and that way you get a better deal?
They can go to the Presidential Puppetry site, but it's easier to go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or even ask a bookstore. A final thing, I'd love to give talks to any group of virtually any size, so I'd love to talk to a group.
Mr. Tarpley, back again here on World Crisis Radio. So Presidential Puppetry by Andrew Craig, Kreig. If you're interested in having him give a talk, you can go to the Presidential Puppetry website, or alternatively send me an email and I can forward it to him. And of course, as far as that activism goes, we recommend also United Front Against Austerity and Tax Wall Street Party. Designed every detail of that and run every detail. No. The whole point is that the U.S. presidency is a puppet post unless you have a president who is willing to fight to make it something else. And Franklin D. Roosevelt is the leading example of recent years. and John F. Kennedy is also one. So here we have this very interesting book by Andrew Craig, which describes, and this is Craig, Kreig, Presidential Puppetry, Obama, Romney, and Their Masters. It's available from, from Eagle View Books in Washington, D.C. Andrew, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, but welcome. Why don't you come on? Are you there? Hello? Andrew? Hello? Maybe the control room can help me out here? No? Okay. Presidents automatically have power, and that if something happens, the president must have made it happen. People say, well, if the battleship Maine blew up in Havana Harbor, then that must have been designed by William McKinley. And if the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, that must have been designed by Franklin D. Roosevelt. Both of those are wrong, by the way. Neither one was designed by a U.S. president. And 9/11, people say, oh, well, Bush or maybe Cheney must have Well, let me just, go ahead. And let me just describe what I found one of the more interesting samples of this stuff. Obama and Romney and so forth, all right, fine. But here, let's look at the part about General David Petraeus, right, in whom we're always interested because he incarnates the tendencies towards dictatorship, coup d'etat in the present situation. And here's what we find. And during the course of the last couple of weeks, I've come across a book, the title of which alone recommends it. This is called Presidential Puppetry. Presidential Puppetry by Andrew Craig. And it's a new book, and here's the importance of it from my point of view. The biggest fallacy, or one of the biggest and most stubborn fallacies in analyzing U.S. politics, is this assumption that